Alright, let's do this. Um, Welcome to the 5th episode of my Big Four of Thrash Metal series, in which I will take a look at the 5th releases from Metallica, Slayer, Anthrax, and Megadeth. So this should make for some interesting discussion, I must say. But first, let's recap my rankings of the first 4 albums from these bands. Just in case you missed the first 4 episodes, or you don't feel like watching them, or don't remember them, or whatever. For debut albums, I ranked them as Kill 'Em All is number 1, then Show No Mercy, then Fistful of Metal, and then Killing Is My Business. But honestly, sometimes I rank Killing Is My Business before Fistful of Metal. Those two kind of teeter-totter between the third and fourth slot, so it comes very close. Then sophomore albums would go Ride the Lightning is number 1, then Peace Sells, but Who's Buying, then Hell Awaits, and then Spreading the Disease. With third albums would rank as Master of Puppets, then Rain and Blood, then Among the Living, and then So Far, So Good, So What. And finally, fourth albums I would list in the order of Rust in Peace as a very high number 1, then South of Heaven, then And Justice for All, and then State of Euphoria. So check out those videos for more information, and let's go ahead and begin looking at their 5th albums from each band. It's close, but my favorite is most likely Seasons of the Abyss, which in my opinion is the last truly remarkable Slayer record, at least for a while, until they came close to recapturing that magic again later on. I find Seasons to be slightly better than South of Heaven, but not quite as good as their first 3. There are some really great songs here for sure, though. Some of my favorite from the band, actually. And, the sound quality here isn't the best, but the raw production has really grown on me over the years, and kind of gives this album kind of a unique and lifelike feel, which, I think works to its advantage. There's a lot of variety in the chords and riffing here, heavily distorted and wickedly fast tempos that make up for, Slayer's signature sound. It feels right at home here. You can certainly come to expect the usual thick-sounding bar chords and tremolo-picked outputs that serve the band favorably, in every case, including this one. And, I really admire Kerry King and Jeff Hanneman, despite most metalheads, as I said, criticizing their leads and solos as not structured enough and yada yada. The riffs here are incredibly ferocious and aggressive, with a much heavier and unrelenting sound than the previous album. Musically, this one goes back to the roots and could almost serve as a follow-up to Show No Mercy, their debut. Dave Lombardo's beats are sick as usual, his captivatingly violent drumming complementing the guitar work flawlessly. Tom Araya, whose vocals were starting to kind of decline with this album, and as his voice would eventually be reduced to basically just, generically shouting the words. His bass lines are alright, but nothing to write home about. I do think this may have been when Araya started to contribute to the lyrics a lot more, though. As before, it was mostly King and Hanneman who penned most of the words, and we quickly found out that Araya was clearly more inspired by stuff like serial killers and war, with Dead Skin Mask, one of the fan favorite, being all about the infamous murderer, the notorious Ed Gein. Look him up for more info, for sure. Very, very interesting story. So rather than the usual satanic and anti-Christian imagery and fare that is prevalent on the previous records, they went in a slightly more serious and meaningful approach to the writing here. Instead of just mindless, evil, and brutal words, darker themes were abundant on this album. And I kind of appreciate them for, focusing less on Satanism and more on realistic world issues. I think it was definitely a welcome progression. It kind of showed that they really grew and kind of matured as a band. Not that there's anything wrong with the writing on their early material, for sure. That's just freaking metal as hell. But, they even tackle politics a few times here, So, with great songs like War Ensemble, Spirit in Black, Expendable Youth, Dead Skin Mask, Skeletons of Society, and the title track, Seasons of the Abyss is a must-own for every metal fan. So do yourself a favor and purchase this record right away, and you'll definitely be glad you did. Own it now. Alright, so second place, and not too far behind Seasons at all, would be Persistence of Time by Anthrax. Now, again, it was a very hard choice between this one and Seasons for the first place slot. So, it's very, very, very close. It's kind of a toss-up, I like them both almost equally, so almost had to flip a coin to the side because, I love this album, and I find it contains some of Anthrax's best material by far. Hell, it's really close between this and Spreading the Disease when it comes to my favorite Anthrax record. And I'd say it's a huge step up from the preceding album, State of Euphoria. It seems to be kind of underrated, actually, I guess most people prefer Among the Living, and, I can see why. But, I find this one even better. The sound on display here is still very much thrash, but it seems to have a more mature and darker style when compared to their past work. A somewhat aesthetic shift, and while that tone didn't fit State of Euphoria all that much, it definitely works here. With some slower songs that are still very heavy and crushing in nature, it's hard to understand this record's neglected status. Persistence of Time features some truly passionate and emotional instrumental performances and some incredible vocal acrobatics as well. Longer, slower, and more deeply written songs were prevalent here. We got Time, Keep It in the Family, In My World, Gridlock, Belly of the Beast, and even a cover of Joe Jackson's Got the Time. They're some of Anthrax's best work, for sure. They were really on their game here. It's sad that it didn't cross over into their next projects, There was a lot of tension in the band during this recording, which surprisingly doesn't seem too apparent and, may have actually worked in their favor. It's not really that clear while listening to this record. It seems like they're having a great time, But yeah, singer Joey Belladonna, who's my favorite thrash vocalist ever and is sickeningly underrated, was let go shortly after this album's release. Apparently the problem was this. Rhythm guitarist and band leader Scott Ian, who we all know, he wrote all the lyrics, and he didn't think Joey sang them the right way and lacked the proper emotion. I'm sorry, Scott, I love you, but you were dead wrong there, and you're lucky to have a vocalist as great as Joey in your arsenal. His powerful pipes made some of your less impressive songs sound better than they actually were. Sorry to say. He really put his heart into it and displayed all the right attitude and expression on every amazing vocal line. I hear that, drummer Charlie Benante even hated seeing Joey get on the tour bus. Oh, what the hell, man? They must have been, jealous of him or something. But, I'm glad that all these years later, they finally realized that he's the one true Anthrax singer. He's the voice of Anthrax. And, when he left, the band died for a while, at least in my opinion. I know the John Bush era wasn't all that bad. It has its fans, for sure. A lot of people prefer Bush to Belladonna. But that period just doesn't sound like Anthrax to me. It clearly wasn't thrash metal at all anymore. I still like Bush and Armored Saint, and can still tolerate some of his stuff with Anthrax, especially the first album he did with them, Sound of White Noise. But he's got, no range, and can only do one generic style that is akin to what every other 90s vocalist was doing at the time. I'm sorry, but Joey could sing Rings Around Bush. It's just, come on now. But anyway, that's a topic for another video. With some highly memorable and standout guitar playing from Dan Spitz and Scott Ian, a top-notch rhythm section from bassist Frank Bello and drummer Charlie Benante, and the icing on the cake being Joey's Belladonna's breathtaking vocals, Persistence of Time is a fantastic record and quite possibly Anthrax's finest hour. This came very close to being my number one for the Big Four fifth albums. Very close indeed. Check it out. Alright, so now it gets kind of hard, but I don't know. Next, I guess, would be Countdown to Extinction by Megadeth. I don't know, it's a close one between this and Black Album, but since I find Countdown kind of underrated and usually unfairly criticized quite often, well, Metallica's self-titled has been beaten across my face constantly to ad nauseum to the point of, gagging. I guess I'll give this one the edge. Now I've already reviewed this record before, and I gave it its own individual video not too long ago, so I won't go into too much detail. But I will say that while it was a rather disappointing follow-up after the monumental Rust in Peace, I still think it's mostly undeserving of all the hate that it gets. It's still, not truly great or anything, but not terrible either. Marty Friedman is still my favorite guitarist of all the players in these four bands, and I still think that Megadeth has always had the best guitar playing of the Big Four of thrash. Probably my least favorite vocals, though. However. But yeah, this was the second album to feature my favorite lineup of Marty Friedman on guitar and Nick Menza on drums. Marty truly is a genius on the six strings, and his kick-ass shredding was just made for Megadeth. Nick Menza, rest in peace, who is probably my favorite Megadeth drummer, is also a force to be reckoned with. His heavy and precise beats are nothing short of incredible on this album. He had serious chops. and so on and so on. And let's not forget the main man himself, Dave Mustaine, who of course is a great guitar player in his own right. He's written some truly classic riffs here, and his performance really shines on songs like Architecture of Aggression, which has kind of a simple and mid-tempo pace, which fits perfectly. I've never been a huge fan of Dave Mustaine's vocals, but they've become a staple of Megadeth sound anyway, and I really couldn't picture anybody else singing for the band. Bassist David Ellefson gives a solid performance as usual, and I heard that he actually composed a lot of his own bass lines for this recording, so, mad props. His steady and firm playing combined with the dynamic drums provides for a more than adequate rhythm section. The lyrics, written by Mustaine, obviously, mostly deal with themes such as war, drugs, and the U.S. political system, the chemistry between the musicians featured here is still quite strong, it makes for some truly exciting and memorable tunes. But I do have to agree with a lot of criticisms the CD often gets. As I said, it's by no means a perfect album. It has its downsides for sure, and it was indeed such a letdown after the previous release. I think we all can agree with that. And some of the songs, such as the title track, seem to kind of lag energy and focus, and others seem like filler, and some others seem like they're solely written to hit the radio charge, which would have been fine if it wasn't so obvious. Some people consider this the Black Album from Megadeth, which I don't think it's too far off, but not quite. I still think it has, a lot more redeeming qualities. And I'm not saying they were sellouts at this point either, but there are definitely some noticeable changes that seem to really become apparent here. Also, some of the tracks are a bit repetitive and lack variety. At least they did recover from this, unlike Metallica, which just got worse and worse after their sellout album, I guess. But yeah, no, I don't blame Marty Friedman for any of these flaws at all, by the way, as he's still a god amongst men when it comes to guitar. Similarly, how I don't blame Joey Belladonna for any of Anthrax's problems. It's not Marty's fault. Most of the problems here are probably related to Mustaine's writing, but who knows, who can say. But still, I'm not bashing this album, it's not terrible. And, okay, alright, now, onto the songs. The highlights for me that I would personally recommend would probably be Foreclosure of a Dream, Architecture of Aggression, This Was My Life, Skin of My Teeth, Ashes in Your Mouth, and of course Symphony of Destruction, which has one of my all-time favorite riffs, very catchy chorus and insane atmosphere. Sweating Bullets has a catchy chorus too, but kind of feels like filler with some really silly lyrics. But anyway, despite its flaws, I would still say you should give this record a chance, if for anything other than just to hear Marty Friedman's amazing compositions alone. He never gives a dull performance, no matter what, even on their lesser albums. And in my opinion, some of the material here isn't quite as inspired as the band's earlier work, but Marty's skills are still prevalent here. So give Countdown to Extinction, a listen if you haven't got the chance already. There may be some forgettable songs you'll find yourself skipping over, but there are others that certainly save the album from being purely mediocre. Countdown to Extinction, not their best, but far from their worst. Check out my individual review. This has its own video for more info on that. And alright, now we have the infamous Black Album. Oh gosh, yeah. Metallica's notorious self-titled release that, everybody knows about whether they like it or not. Oh my gosh. What can I add that hasn't already been stated a million times? This was, as we all know, where the band radically changed their style and, their sound, and they weren't really metal anymore, at all. And since this is a thrash metal discussion, this probably would rank the worst of the 5 Big Four albums when looked at from that perspective, because hell, in all actuality, this is technically a great album, with some great songwriting and stellar production from producer Bob Rock. Well, maybe not great, but good. It may look better from an objective and unbiased outsider viewpoint, but in my personal opinion, this is just too bland and simple for the band that gave us, Kill 'Em All, Ride the Lightning, and Master of Puppets, It's not a true Metallica album at all, Here we have a very mainstream rock, with highly commercial and radio-friendly hits that were so obviously written with those intentions in mind. I've heard all these boring songs way too much, and if I never hear Enter Sandman, Sad But True, The Unforgiven, Wherever I May Roam, or any of these other things ever again, it'll be too soon. I'm just sick to death of every single track from this album. I literally want to gag every time they come so invasively on the radio. Gosh, everybody marks this as the point where Metallica became sellouts and set out recorded albums that would go stratospheric, and they're probably not too far off, They were no longer an aggressive and fast-playing metal act. Now we're more of a pop band with catchy and shallow verses and patterns, that are just so, kind of the average narrow-minded, mall-going redneck could enjoy. Pardon those I didn't mean to insult anybody, pardon that, those terms, but, you know, the Black Album is definitely the dividing line between the fans of their older, more metal material and fans of their newer and more accessible sound. You know, most hardcore metalheads stop at Injustice for All, and while the more casual music fans only listen to this album and everything after. So, you know, I hate to separate the two eras, you know, old and Metallica like everybody else does, but it's so hard not to when they're so polar opposite, you know, old versus new Metallica. You know, and I will say, I will give this album some credit. You know, these songs are catchy, and I guess they are kind of well written for that type of, you know, sound they were going for. And I will say that some of Kirk Hammett's solos are still pretty good, you know, and tolerable considering. And, you know, don't sound too far off, but I don't know, most of the riffs are just kind of generic and boring. You know, they're just so, like, as I said, so shallow and so by the numbers, so basic. You know, all the members have cut their hair really short, not too long after this. Probably around the top of the next album, and you know this can be looked at as a perfect visual representation of this drastic change in style. You know, I mean, I can somewhat appreciate James and Lars wanting to branch out and change their sound a bit. You know, try something new. You know, without playing the old stuff forever. I can respect that. I can understand. You know, they would get bored of doing the same thing over. I mean, Slayer stayed mostly consistent over the years, and you know, didn't change their style all that much, with some exceptions. But they've been criticized for being too repetitive and monotonous and releasing the same album over and over. So really, you can't win. I mean, either you're too similar or you're too different. But anyway, yeah, I guess this is technically a good album, as I said, and these are technically good rock songs. And maybe I would appreciate it if it were a different band, and if I were, you know, listening for something different. You know, but I'm a thrash metal fan. I'm not a casual listener of average radio hits that are manufactured and churned out, you know, just to hit the top charts and be poppy, and you know, I'd rather be challenged intellectually than be a slave to closed-minded, predominant commodities and unintelligent rubbish. You know, plus this album may have been responsible for the death of thrash in the '90s. You know, just so like it seems like a pop album almost. You know, just so like accessible and just so like basic. You know, but having said all that, with all that, you know, criticizing out of the way, I do not hate this album, and as I said, you know, it's technically a well-written album for like modern rock, not metal, certainly not thrash metal, and it is pretty nostalgic for me in a lot of ways as well, you know, and while I don't need to hear these songs ever again, I've heard them twice, I still have pleasant memeries of them, you know, I have some fond experiences, you know, listening to this album, and, you know, while it's not on the same level with their previous work, you know, I did used to, you know, listen to these songs quite a bit. There was a time where, you know, I did spin this album quite frequently, you know, so I may have sounded overly critical, but again, I was looking at it from a purely objective and outside point of view, from the perspective of a thrash fan making a thrash video. And you know, if for some bizarre reason you've been living under a rock and haven't heard this yet, I'd still recommend it, just not as a metal CD. And not really as a Metallica CD. It's kind of hard to believe that, you know, they had albums like Kill 'Em All that were hung up in a, you know, an underground, dark dungeon-like basement of a record store in Norway by black metal fans. I mean, black metal, you heard me right, underground dungeon metal shop for black metal, and they worshipped early Metallica. This is the same band that, you know, is constantly on MTV and constantly on the radio, and I'm just so sick of seeing Lars Ulrich's face everywhere, and like they're just so well known and so like such a household name that it's sickening. It's like it's hard to believe how much they changed, you know. But yeah, as I said, I'd still recommend it not as a metal CD. And in looking from a thrash metal point of view, it is the worst of these albums because it's the least thrash metal to me. You know, Countdown to Extinction is still a thrash record. You know, it's still a very much a metal album. Despite not being, you know, maybe not as much so as their previous releases. But yeah, anyway, I think that about covers it. I mean, you know, it's kind of hard to say. I might change my mind about some of these, but I think I still stand by my ranking and, you know, my little miniature reviews. So I'd say that's about it for the 5th albums from the Big Four. You know, I'm not sure at this point how many more of these I'm going to make. But we'll see in due time, you know. I still love all these bands and always will, as, you know, even with their lesser material, they're still responsible for some truly great experiences, some fond memories, you know. Yeah, I love all these bands, you know. I still worship them. I still idolize them, you know, even if they lost their way somewhat. I mean, you can't put, you know, you can't do, you can't put out a perfect, flawless record every single time like Iron Maiden did, like in the 80s and early 90s. You know, and even they kind of lost their way. You know, they had some missteps along the way. So, you know, it's expected. Yeah, I feel like these bands kind of lose their steam a little early. But again, I don't hate any of these albums. They're far from their worst albums, and I'd still say check them out. All right, guys. Well, that's it for part 5. And again, as I said, I'm not sure if I'm going to make any more. I might do a part 6. Look at their 6 albums. I don't know if I'm going to continue. I don't know if I'm going to keep doing this because we get into territory. We get into the territory. Well, some of them are like truly awful and like not even really worth discussing. And also, there's some cover albums like Undisputed Attitude by Slayer and Garage Inc. by Metallica. And I don't know if those count in their discography. I don't really think they do, but it might be debatable. Some people might have, who knows. But anyway, I think that about covers it. I still love these bands. Long live thrash metal. Keep it heavy. All right, guys. Later.